Welcome to a new story. In November 2000, a three-man gang broke into Michelle Renee's house. They attached explosives to Michelle's body and daughter, Bria, and threatened to kill Michelle and kill her daughter if she did not execute their requests. Michelle was ready to do anything to save her little girl, but the gang's requests were very difficult. Criminals asked Michelle to steal the bank where she worked. The decision was difficult for Michelle, but she was trying to act properly. Will Michelle agree to requests from criminals, or will she escape, and what is her daughter's fate? Let's start analyzing Michelle's case so we know what happened to her. Michelle Renee is 35 years old and separated from her husband. She worked diligently at the bank until Michelle became the manager of her bank and people respected and trusted her. Michelle lived with her daughter Bria in a beautiful and quiet house in the city of Vista in California. The house was isolated and built on a high hill in an area of great nature. Her house was beautiful and safe. But in November 2000, it was the beginning of the terrifying events in Michelle's house. One quiet night, Michelle's daughter Bria woke up scared. She ran quickly to her mother and woke her up. Bria was very scared and told her that she had seen someone looking at her out of the window when she was asleep. Michelle went to her daughter's room and checked the place, but found no trace of anyone. Michelle returned to her daughter and reassured her that what her daughter saw could be just bad dreams. Michelle thought her 7-year-old daughter Bria fancied having such things, and Michelle didn't pay attention to this. The following day, on November 21st, 2000, Michelle finished her job at the bank and came home, watched TV with her daughter and kind of enjoying. At 8 p.m. they heard a powerful knock on the door. There were 3 masked men who broke the back door of the house and walked into it. They were armed and they immediately grabbed the mother and daughter. A gang member immediately tied Michelle and her daughter to tape. Michelle was so scared, she asked the criminals what they wanted from her. The head of the gang came to Michelle and told her that he wanted her to steal the bank where she worked. If you don't do this, he's gonna kill her daughter and then he's gonna kill Michelle. And it turns out that he was the one responsible for scaring Bria the other night. He said that he had been watching Michelle and her daughter for a year, and then he knew all the details of their lives, and then the ringleader explained Michelle's plan to steal the bank. The ringleader was talking with the voice of a woman by radio. That means there's someone else outside the house who's helping the gang. At 11 p.m., a car arrived at Michelle's house. She was Michelle's girlfriend. It's Michelle's best friend Kimbra Oliver, who was living with Michelle at the time. When Kimbra entered the house, the gang immediately grabbed her and tied her with duct tape and placed her next to Michelle. The next day, at 6 a.m., the ringleader woke Michelle up and told her to get ready to go to the bank. They also put explosives on Michelle's body, daughter, and friend, and the gang warned Michelle not to do anything contrary to the plan or they would blow it up with her and her daughter. And then they locked Kimbra in the toilet and Bria put her in the wardrobe. Michelle was so scared. Michelle and the gang commander got in the car and 2 gang members stayed at home. In the car that Michelle was driving under gunpoint, the gang boss gave Michelle a bag and hid in the back seat. Michelle arrived at the bank and immediately entered the safe with her colleague as they usually do, and here Michelle's colleague felt weird about Michelle's actions and about the bag she was carrying. And inside the safe, Michelle told her colleague that she had to take money out of the safe, and I told her that her daughter had been kidnapped and that she could be killed if she didn't take the money. The criminals attached the explosives to their bodies and raised her coat to see her fellow explosives on Michelle's body. Michelle took the money and put it in the bag and quickly walked out of the bank. And here Michelle's colleague immediately called the police and told them what happened. Michelle got into her car and drove off, and after 2 miles the gang commander asked her to stop and get out of the car and tell her nearby he's leaving the car there. Michelle rushed home. The house was quiet. Michelle started looking for her daughter until she found her in the wardrobe, and this moment was the happiest moment in Michelle's life and her daughter and friend Kimbra, but the explosives were still on Michelle's body. And then they got out of the house and went to a nearby house, and from there they called the police and told them what happened. The police, a team of investigators and a specialist team, came to dismantle the explosives, but immediately the police discovered that the explosives were not real. They were just wax bars painted red. Michelle and her daughter's kidnapping is over. But Michelle had paid attention to more than one evidence of criminals. She told the police that when she spoke with the ringleader, she could see his eyes clearly from under the mask he was wearing. She felt she knew him. Michelle tried to remember until she found that the gang leader was someone who had interviewed her at the bank the same day the crime happened. She said that this guy was a freak who had sat with her for a long time in the bank. He was asking strange questions about the mechanism of work at the bank, and that person was accompanied by a woman waiting for him abroad. Several hours later, the kidnapping took place. This person was Christopher Butler. Christopher Butler has entered the bank impersonating a businessman who wants to invest his money in the bank. The woman with whom he was his fiancée, Alyssa. The police began investigating Butler and found that he was a former criminal who had made numerous robbery attempts. After observing Butler and his fiancée, the police were not able to discover the identity of the other two people involved in the crime. The first was Michael Hawkins, the second was Robert Ortiz, and on the first day of December the police arrested all gang members. The police searched Butler's house, and they found a lot of evidence of the crime. Like the paint they used to color wax bars, wireless communication devices, and masks, they also found a gun in Butler's car, but also the gun wasn't real. They also found the bag Michelle used to move the money, but the police didn't find the money. They only found $93,000 in Michael Hawkins' possession, where the whole amount they stole was $360,000. Michael Hawkins and Robert Ortiz confessed to the crime, and Butler denied all charges and was trying to protect his fiancée Lisa. Lisa admitted that she was the mastermind of the crime and that she was the one who planned the theft. Lisa said that her and Butler's share of the money was stolen and they didn't know who stole it. And surprisingly, Lisa said that Michelle was a gang member and that she was involved with them in the crime. Investigators were shocked by Lisa's confession, and could Michelle have exploited her little girl to carry out this crime? The investigators felt that the confession was not true and that Michelle was innocent and had nothing to do with the crime. But of course the bench will not accept Michelle's acquittal without evidence. The investigation began with Michelle, and investigators asked her about many details that happened on the day of the crime. Michelle seemed very impressed, and that's what made the investigators sympathize with her. But the investigators were forced to complete the investigation, and while investigating Michelle, the investigators found a bad past that Michelle had experienced. Where she left the house aged 15 and lived alone, she worked as a nightclub dancer, and she was trying to find work other than dancing in nightclubs. She was trying to apply for jobs through a forged biography. She also had some debts and material problems, but that's not proven evidence of her involvement in the crime. Shortly after Butler's trial began in Lissa, Butler was trying to acquit Lissa. Butler said that he was having an affair with Michelle, and said that he recognized her in a grocery store 2 years ago, and that they planned together to rob the bank, and that she was the one who suggested we steal the bank where she worked. Of course, Michelle denied everything Butler said, and she was crying in court because the bench was treating her as a defendant in the crime and not the victim. The bench eventually sentenced Butler to guilt for theft and kidnapping. She handed down a 64-year prison sentence, and the court also ruled that Lisa was not guilty because she was not in Michelle's house during the crime. Lisa was released only 12 days later, and Michael Hawkins and Robert Ortiz were sentenced to life imprisonment. Michelle and her daughter started a 2-year psychotherapy, but Michelle decided to skip the trauma and stay strong for her daughter. Michelle wrote 2 books, one explaining how she was able to overcome the trauma she and her daughter experienced. But Priya, when she became 18 years old, had a neurological disease that made her completely paralyzed. But Michelle refused to give up and kept helping her daughter until she recovered from the disease and was able to walk and talk. Several years later, Michael Hawkins and Robert Ortiz had read the book Michelle wrote. They sent letters of apology to Michelle and her daughter and asked them to forgive. In fact, Michelle and Bria forgave Michael and Robert. Bria even testified in favor of Robert Ortiz before the bench in 2021, and because of Bria's testimony, Robert was able to get out of prison. Robert was very remorseful for what he did, and Christopher Butler was never remorseful. He has also said false words about Michelle before the bench. In 2022, Butler filed a release request. He retracted his statement that he was in a relationship with Michelle and that she was complicit in the crime. But the bench refused to release him and he remained imprisoned, and 22 years after the crime, Michelle was acquitted. But the stranger in the case is the disappearance of the money that was stolen. The protagonist of this story is Michelle, who remained strong and coherent despite the trauma she suffered, and also endured false accusations for 22 years, and eventually succeeded in helping her daughter recover from the neurological disease she suffered. This is the end of our story today. I hope you're impressed, and don't forget to support our channel right now. Good night.